everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm here with Pastor Chad, lead pastor at Freedom Life Church, and we're here talking about the follow-up of last Sunday's message, which we were talking about the righteousness of Jesus. We started a new series, our Easter series. If you missed it, there should be a link below us on our Facebook page showing the message, and then check that out, and then come back up, and we have the follow-up video. So I think we have some good things to talk about this morning.
Yeah.
Again, we were talking about the righteousness of Jesus, and there's many places you could have gone. There's many verses you could have gone to. There's books and books talking about the righteousness of Jesus, but you decided to go a certain way. Was there anything that is there anything that you didn't really get time to talk about, or maybe something that you feel like the viewers need to hear?
Yeah, we did read a ton of texts on Sunday, which is actually a little bit of a departure from what we normally do. We tend to be anchored into one text. Sometimes 5, 6, 7 verses, and we just kind of walk through those. And I may mention and quote other verses or whatnot. But this particular sermon, I was anchored in the book of Romans, which is the reason why we read like 3 very large passages in the book of Romans. But we could have replaced every text we read on Sunday with a different text, and the sermon could have been exactly the same, because there is, like you said, a ton of things out there, a ton of information. This tends to be one of the things that Paul really gravitates towards, but honestly, it's the gospel, so it's the whole of the book, and I think we opened the sermon talking about that. It's the whole of the book, and so that's what we're talking about. Our Easter series, which we've been pretty excited about, I mean, it's been coming.
Looking forward to it.
Where we just really get to kind of break it down and look at, here are some elements of the gospel we want you to see. And, this was one that I think that does tend to get a little lost when we talk about the life of Jesus and whatnot. So I won't digress too much on maybe trying to add a bunch of stuff. The one thing I will say is that we didn't talk about a lot was, in the Romans 5 text that we read, where it keeps saying, through the one man's sin, death reigned, through the one man, through the one man, through the one man. I think I just mentioned, hey, that's Adam.
Right.
But we didn't go into that, but the Apostle Paul's really, in that moment, builds just an amazing kind of comparative between Jesus and Adam. Jesus is referred to as the second Adam.
Right.
And so then the reason why Paul kind of brings up the contrast is because it's a very direct contrast. It's really the point that he's trying to make is, we get Adam, and if I can put it this way, he kind of has his shot at perfection in the beginning.
Yeah.
He's in God's perfection as man, but then in the garden, serpent comes and he fails. He falls into temptation and he fails. And so then separation comes and man gets pushed away from God, separated from God, out into the wilderness. Well, then you get Jesus, who shows up in the wilderness. Serpent comes. Temptation comes, but he passes, and then he walks back into Jerusalem. I believe he walks back into, and he brings back this opportunity to connect with God again. And so where Adam fails in the garden, Jesus passes in the wilderness. Right. And I think it's a beautiful picture where Adam sins at a tree, Jesus atones for sin on a tree.
Right.
So we get this great piece, and that's what Paul's doing there, is he's going, Adam had this shot at perfection but failed, and so God himself then had to come, because a man with no deity, right, came and lived. But then we get Jesus, who is God in the flesh, this incarnation coming down, because it's going to take God to love God and to get us to God. And so God comes and puts on flesh and humbles himself and becomes fully man, and then lives, and passes the test of temptation and lives it perfectly. And so, he says that. That's the reason why Paul's like referring back and forth to that. And we didn't get into that really beautiful comparative picture necessarily, but that's what he's doing in those verses. And I think it's great. And so the only thing that I would say, what I would encourage people to do, is that if you're looking for a place to kind of dig into your Bible and things of that sort, the first 8 chapters of the book of Romans, if in regard to this sermon
Mm-hmm.
are amazing.
Yeah.
You know, I would encourage everybody to read the whole book of Romans.
Right.
But for this particular talk, if you really want to dive in to really understanding, man, this full concept, man, 1 through 8 of the book of Romans is just outstanding. You know, by the time you get to chapter 9, 10, and 11 are heavy. You know, a lot of God's sovereign choice and things of that sort. So it gets a little heavy, but it's almost like an airplane doing touch and go drills.
Mm-hmm.
Touch and go. It kind of lands in 8 and then just launches right back up into 9. But 1 through 8, as far as how the righteousness of God works, how we receive it, and again, that beautiful kind of comparative picture between Adam and Jesus, and that it's wonderful. And so if you want to just a time to kind of read through 8 chapters a couple of different times just to kind of get the whole thing, and then go slow and really begin to study it out. It gets super heavy in chapter 3, which is the reason why we read a lot from chapter 3. And then read that large passage from chapter 5, Chapter 6, talks about not being slaves to sin, but slaves to righteousness. It's awesome. Chapter 7, we get to see Paul, kind of going, okay, I can relate to you. I'm doing the things I don't want to do, and I don't do the things I know I should do. Who's going to rescue me? And then where it kind of lands and culminates is in 8, and it's wonderful. It talks about life in the Spirit and heirs of Christ, but then it ends with that kind of glory to come, and he says, I'm working all things together for your good.
Yeah.
Of those who love me and are called according to my purpose. Right?
Yeah.
And then he says, because we are predestined, and that's kind of the looking forward into 9, but predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. Well, who's his Son? He's talking about Jesus, who's the righteous one, and we're going to be conformed into being like him. And so where he calls us righteous already, and this is kind of one of those things we talk about a lot, righteous already, he calls us, but he says, I'm going to conform you. Now I'm going to use everything in your life, good, bad, or indifferent, to bring you to that place. And then he does this kind of wonderful kind of stack, blocks. Those I predestine, I also call, and those I call, I also justify, and those I justify, I also glorify.
You could keep going.
You could just keep going and going and going. It ends with, if God is for us, who's going to be against us? Who can even bring a charge against the elect, against God's people, against the people of Jesus? The answer is no one. It says it's God who justifies, and that's the point. He comes and he justifies us. And then it even says, who can condemn us? Answer, no one. And then what I love is because his answer is not, not just, hey, well, because you figured out life. It's Christ is the one who died. Why does he say that? It's because he's the perfect one. He's the righteous one. He lived all of this thing perfectly and then gladly laid his life down.
Yeah.
So there is no condemnation for you.
Yeah.
Who can bring a charge against you? In God's eyes, you're righteous.
Yeah.
And I love that, and that's where it lands. And so 1 through 8 is just wonderful. But again, in a sermon, I couldn't read chapter 1 through 8. That's just not going to happen, which is the reason why we just kind of took a bulk of 3, the big chunk in 5, and then just left it. Maybe one of these days we'll get a chance to do the book of Romans, and it'll be awesome.
Yeah, take 3 years.
Yeah, take 3 years. But those 8 chapters, if you just want to dive a little heavier into it, I think is good. Can I throw a couple of resources in real fast? Because I think a lot of times people go, okay, well, I can read them, but I don't necessarily understand them. Well, you can go as far as go to seminary if you want. That's a resource. But I think, kind of going kind of backwards down the scale, there's great software out there if you want to spend a lot of money. Quick Verse, Logos is out there that are great resources, that are chock full of stuff. But if you want just something really simple, low cost, resources that are out there to help you as you kind of study the Bible, to kind of help you dig into those. I love the Net Bible. It's online. net.bible.org is a great place to go because it'll literally put, the apparatus right next to you. It'll put the Greek words next to you, parallel, where you can kind of see it in there. You don't have to know Greek. You can just click on things where you can see it. It's great. It's got a lot of commentaries from smarter guys than me. that you can interact with side by side with the text, I think is wonderful.
Yeah.
I know we both are a big fan of the ESV Study Bible.
Right.
And so if you want to study because there's so much, I guess the reason why I bring that up is because there was a lot of things in the text that we read that I didn't have time to cover, because there was a lot of, maybe even some moderately complex ideas that were in there that he was referring to, and then he was, calling out. I think about the Hebrews text we were in, that we ended with in the sermon.
Right.
Jesus being our high priest. Maybe some people were sitting there going, I don't really get, why is he calling him a high priest? Do we have priests in the church? I thought that was...
It's a cultural difference.
There's a lot of cultural differences, but he's referring a lot back to the Old Testament. He's kind of giving a tip of the cap to that. He's using that language of the sacrificial system they had in the Old Testament and things of that sort. So ESV Study Bible is great.
Right.
To help you dig into that stuff on a simple, concise basis. And so I love for people to study their Bible. I guess that's why I'm throwing it out there. In a sermon where we covered so many texts that have so many different things in it and all that kind of stuff, the only thing I can really do is encourage people to go away from this sermon and study it for themselves and go for it. ESV Study Bible, I think it's like $15 if you want to download the app on your phone or something like that, or you can buy the brick. It looks scary, but it's not.
I got the brick.
Yeah, you got the brick. It looks scary, but it's really not. It's got just a lot of great, concise things. I think you can testify to that. It's really, really simple. It's really, really concise, and it just kind of helps you to understand what you're reading, and I think it's great. I have it on my phone. It's a wonderful resource for people that don't want to spend a lot of money or go to seminary.
Yeah,
Or
so you just pick up a Romans commentary.
Yeah, and like I said, there's great commentaries that are out there that you can pick up that you can even download on your phone. N.T. Wright's got a great set of commentaries with Paul's epistles. It's awesome. He does a really good job on that. It makes it an easy read. Even it's different than some commentaries, and so it's great. Great resources out there. But like I said, there's some really good ways for people to study their Bible, because Romans 1-8 would help them understand the concept we talked about on Sunday. That they could go deeper to understand this truth.
Well, I think it's important that they just, people just don't come to church, hear the pastor,
right,
and then leave and go home, and then there's like no study of the word.
Yeah.
If you actually want to get the deeper truths of the text, you want to study it on your own.
Because we just don't have a whole lot of time on Sunday morning. It's not a Bible class.
Right.
It's the heralding of the gospel moment, in my opinion. I think John Piper uses that phrase.
Yeah.
It's the heralding moment, and I think he's right. I think he's right to say it that way. That's what preaching is. That's what Sunday morning is. And so I would really encourage people, hey, dig deeper into this topic, because it's beautiful. It helps to really fortify my faith in Christ when I understand how I'm made righteous in Him. I think it's really great. And so also asking questions. I tell people that all the time. It's a tragic thing that we do as Christians, is we just don't ask the questions that we have because we feel like somehow that makes me a less than person. I ask questions all the time. I'm constantly asking questions about what a text means or what. And so I would encourage people to ask questions. I mean, I've literally had people look at me and go, "Well, I don't want to bug you with this." And I'm like, you don't know, like, I would love to sit down and talk about the Bible with anyone, because I think it's fun for me, and it energizes me to know that the people of God are studying the Word. And so Romans 1-8 would be just a great place to land, and so to kind of help kind of grasp this, my righteousness comes from the life of Jesus. I think it's great. So
well, and getting a little bit deeper in your sermon, you mentioned the righteousness of Jesus. Where did Jesus get His righteousness from?
Yeah.
And I think most people were on board with where you're going. But I think that can be a kind of confusing statement at times, because then you think, well, where did Jesus get His righteousness from? Then it's like, oh, well, I didn't think about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you clarify a little bit more on what you spoke on Sunday?
That's a good question. Because obviously I'm not saying that Jesus wasn't righteous before His life,
right? Because
He's God. Like that's what we believe.
Well, and even Paul said He was righteous. So why,
Yeah, right. And so, Jesus is obviously, He's God, so He is completely righteous. before he comes to earth. But what I mean by that statement, like, where did he get his righteousness? Because Paul talks about how he gets to be just and the justifier, right? And where we kind of look at that idea is what I mean by that statement is that Jesus gets the righteousness to give to you and I when he comes in the incarnation and lives this perfect life. That's the righteousness that we were talking about on Sunday. Our God is eternally righteous.
Right.
But the righteousness that he was going to give to us, I think even in the truth of the gospel, had to come via a fully man living this life perfectly.
Yeah.
He becomes this perfect sacrifice for us, this perfected human being. This is the reason. And again, that's a concept that's difficult to get into unless if that's the main point. It's difficult to digress on a Sunday morning. But Jesus is both fully God, but he has to be fully man so that he lives a human life. And that's the righteousness that we were talking about, because that's the righteousness he's going to give us. Because that's the righteousness that's demanded for us to be in right standing before God. That's the righteousness that's demanded. It's perfected. It is perfection in life. And so we don't have that. And so for Jesus had to come fully man, incarnation, in the flesh, and live a perfect life. And so what we're saying is, what I was saying is that where does the righteousness come from for Jesus? Where does Jesus' righteousness come from? Where does Jesus' righteousness come from to give us in this life? It comes from his perfected life. Yeah. Or else he could have just shown up, like what we were saying on Sunday, shown up just as deity. Well, I'm righteous, so here's my righteousness. It wouldn't work that way.
Right.
This is the reason why God made it to be this way. Before the foundation of the world was laid, the Lamb was slain. This was plan A. This was the way it was going to go.
Right.
And God knew that what I have to be just, is I have to have a perfect man, to lay down his life. You actually read that in the book of Romans, in Romans 5, just above where we were, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And he says, maybe a righteous man would give his life for someone else, for a good person. He might lay his life down.
Right.
But even while we were still sinners, Christ died because he came and lived this perfect, sinless life for us, and gained the righteousness to gift to you and I. Yeah. Gain the righteousness in his human form. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's really what we were saying on Sunday. Not that he wasn't righteous before he came. He was, because he was God. But there was a righteous demand that there had to be a perfect man lay his life down.
I think it's amazing. Paul even describes himself because what I said earlier, what Paul said he was righteous, I meant that Paul, according to the law, at that time, he was doing everything according to the law. Yes. Which in God's eyes isn't completely righteous because they were doing the law the wrong way.
Exactly.
And so I think I just wanted to clarify that because whenever he talks about him doing the right things, he's like, man, I count it all as a loss. Yeah. In comparison to what Jesus did, compared to his righteousness, it's different.
Yeah, the scales are not balanced when you look at God's Christ's righteousness that he lives, the perfection he walks in. Because even the Pharisees in the Bible have that issue with Jesus because they feel like they're following the law to the letter. But Jesus consistently shows them their inconsistencies. Yeah. Where they fail to actually do that. And so even in Paul's statement in Philippians, because we read it, when it comes to righteousness, I'm blameless. Yes, but no. And he understands that. He understands that, no, I really wasn't blameless. Even in one point in the Bible, Paul makes a statement, I was so zealous for the things of the law that I broke the law. Yeah. I was so zealous to go after this that I actually failed in it. And so he's using that kind of language. So we really get the picture of Jesus literally did this without sinning. Yeah. So even a person like Paul who pursued to be right before God, it was rubbish. It was not good enough. And so that's beautiful, which is the reason, I actually, because of time's sake, I was like, maybe we shouldn't read the book of, the Philippians text. And I was no, we got to read this.
You went to it anyway.
We have to read this because, because he's saying just that, and so we needed somebody to actually be perfect. Live this life the way we live it and live it perfectly to have true righteousness to then gift to us, to make us right before God. Right. That's what we needed. And so that's where Jesus' righteousness comes from, to give us. That's what we were saying in that moment. I think it's a great question. I don't want anybody to be confused at that, but this is one of those kind of, Jesus is everything for us. Mm-hmm. I mean, he gets justified. He is sanctified. He even prays that. Yeah. God, sanctify me. Well, you're God already, Jesus. Why do you need sanctified? Because he's doing all of this stuff for us. Conversation with John the Baptist. John the Baptist was like, wait, whoa, I need to baptize you? I can't even unlatch your sandal, bro, Yeah. And Jesus is like, no, this is needed. I need to do it. Why? Yeah. Because he's baptized for us. And so we see this. So he is righteous for us in this life, lived it the way we lived it, was tempted how we were tempted, and did not sin. And so that he would have righteousness to give us, And
good.
Oh, it's so good.
So
and
good.
You just keep going on and on and on about it because it's just beautiful. But I'm hoping everybody's excited to take this journey with us as we kind of look at, the life of Jesus, death of Jesus, resurrection of Jesus, ascension of Jesus, and return in this series, because it's all good news. Yeah. It's all good news.
It's fun. Well, thanks for clarifying some things. It was great. If you didn't catch last week's sermon, make sure you check it out. It's in the link below. And then be here next Sunday, 10:30 a.m. We're going to have a great time. We're going to be talking about the death of Jesus. Yeah. And right after the service, we're going to have kind of an Easter meal. And then right after that, we're having an Easter egg hunt for all the kids. So join us for that. It's gonna be a lot of fun. And then don't forget, on Wednesday we have Life Together this Wednesday here at the church at 6:30. So join us for that. Bring your kids, bring family, bring friends. We're gonna have a great time talking about the Word of God. And so we love you guys, and y'all have a great week.
See you.
Thank you.